Doughty returns, but the Kings' struggles continue. We give you the details on that and more on this edition of Locked On LA Kings.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Kings fans, welcome to Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for making Locked On LA Kings your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube. I'm Eddie Garcia, your host of Locked On LA Kings. I've worked in sports media for the past 30 years, also co-host of the Puck Podcast, a weekly NHL review show that's been putting out content for the past 18 years, and a passionate LA Kings fan for over 30 years. Super Bowl 59 is here. There's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app and head to FanDuel.com to get started. Well, the LA Kings played game number 48 of the NHL season, game 3 of their 5-game road trip. They were in Sunrise, Florida, to take on the defending Stanley Cup champion Panthers. Kings were looking to bounce back from a subpar showing in their last game in Detroit, a 5-2 loss to the Red Wings. But the big news was the return of Drew Doughty. It would be Drew Doughty's first game action since September 25th when he suffered a broken ankle in a preseason game in Las Vegas. Big question as far as his return would be, where would he play and what moves would be made to fit him back on the roster? Well, the Kings could have placed one of their extra defensemen on waivers with the hopes that they wouldn't be claimed, guys like Andreas Englund or Kyle Burroughs. If they cleared, they could then be sent to the Ontario Reign. Or the Kings could send one of their 2 young players, forward Samuel Hellenius or defenseman Brant Clark, who are waiver exempt to the AHL, without them having been placed on waivers and in no danger of being picked up by another team. Well, the Kings for now decided to send Samuel Hellenius to the AHL. As for the question of where Drew Doughty would be placed in the lineup, at least on paper and at least to start, well, the Kings would go again with the 12-6 setup, 12 forwards and 6 defensemen, 4 straight game that they have done that. The top line would be, again, Anze Kopitar centering Adrian Kempe and Alex Turcotte. We've seen that for quite a number of games now. The second line, though, would be centered by Philip Deneau with Trevor Moore and Warren Foegele. The third line centered by Quentin Byfield with Kevin Fiala and Alex Ferrier. Fiala apparently was a game-time decision due to an illness, but he did play throughout the game. And the fourth line would be Trevor Lewis centering Tanner Jeannot and Akil Thomas drawing into the lineup in place of Samuel Hellenius. The defensive pairings, you would still have Mikey Anderson and Vladislav Gavrikov at least to start. Joel Edmondson and Jordan Spence, the second pairing, and Jacob Moverar with Drew Doughty on the third pairing, although Doughty would get top power play minutes. We'll get more into the decision of picking Spence over Clark a little bit later on, even some rumors about Clark being traded in the near future. As for the goaltending, Darcy Kemper gets to start in net. That meant David Riddick would be the backup. And with the Kings playing on back-to-back nights, that means that Riddick would get the start in their next game in Tampa Bay. But we start and we focus on the game against the Florida Panthers. And the big question for me going into this game was, would the return of Drew Doughty help spark the team to a much-needed win, or at least make them play a bit better? Well, as far as the game summary in this one, the Kings were outshot in the opening period 20-8, but at least for me, it didn't feel like it was that lopsided. I didn't think Florida certainly was dominating the Kings. Maybe they were the better team, okay, but the stats I thought looked a lot worse than the actual game was going. That said, the Panthers did take a 1-0 lead in this one about 5 minutes in, took advantage of a Kings turnover in their own zone. Kings did have a glorious chance to tie it up. Vladislav Gavrikov with a slap shot on net. Save is made, but a rebound goes right to the side of the net, and both Tanner Jeannot and Akil Thomas were both there to try to put the puck into a wide open net. Unfortunately, they kind of got in each other's way and were unable to score. And unfortunately, that wasn't the only missed opportunity for the Kings. They also had a goal by Alex Ferrier disallowed on a controversial goalie interference call. We'll talk more about that coming up. No scoring in the second period, which was a fairly even period. Actually, Kings actually outshot the Panthers 10-9 in that second period. And it's a 1-0 game into the third period. However, in the third, Trevor Lewis was called for a trip. And in the dying seconds of that penalty, Warren Foegele was called for a high stick. So for 9 seconds, Florida had a 2-man advantage and they would end up scoring in the 9 seconds a back-breaking goal to make it 2-0 Panthers. They iced the game with an empty net goal. Final score, Panthers 3, Kings nothing. LA drops to 26, 16, and 6 on the season, 11, 13, and 5 on the road. They're now 0, 2, and 1 on this 5-game road trip. They end up splitting the season series with the Panthers, and the Kings have now tied their longest losing streak of the season at 3 losses in a row. As for the game stats in this one, shots on goal favored Florida 39-30. Power plays, Kings 0 for 2. Florida was 1 for 4 with that goal with the 2-man advantage. Faceoffs favored the Kings 34-26. Hits favored Florida 23-18. And block shots favored the Panthers 20-10. So what was good from a team standpoint for the Kings? I actually thought the Kings got back to what they do best. They played sound defense, something that they haven't done in recent losses to Detroit and Pittsburgh. So that was encouraging. The Kings are never going to consistently just outscore opponents with a strong offense. The Kings' formula to winning is great defense and hopefully getting good enough offense. The defense and the goaltending was good enough, in my opinion, against the Panthers. So what was not so good for the Kings from a team standpoint? Well, obviously, no offense. You can't win if you don't score. Kings are in a scoring drought. They have 2 or fewer goals to the LA Kings in 9 of their last 10 games, including 6 in a row. Their record over that span is 3-6-1. Kings have also, unfortunately, the timing of the scoring drought also comes at a time when they're probably playing their most challenging part of their schedule with a bunch of road games against good quality competition. And that slump, coupled with the scheduling, is adding up to the Kings' worst stretch of the season. Coach's quote from Jim Hiller, and a little bit different. Not going to ask him about Drew Doughty, not going to get his response on the game. I did want to get his response to the controversial call that wiped away the goal that would have made it 1-1 in this one. Why did he not challenge the goalie interference call on Trevor Lewis that nullified the Alex Ferrier goal? This is what the Kings head coach had to say about that quote. That was a tough one. Louis went in. The guy didn't push him in. So did he trip him in? That would be a judgment call. But when the call on the ice is a goal, you have to have some pretty firm evidence to overturn the call on the ice. So, I mean, had it been the other way, I would have liked to see him call the goal and then decide which way we're going. We just didn't feel there was enough to warrant taking that risk, end quote. I realize it's probably a lot easier for me sitting on my couch to see that call and see a replay and make a decision on it. But in my opinion, Jim Hiller should have absolutely challenged that call. Even if he somehow ends up losing the challenge and the Panthers get a power play out of it, I thought it was worth the chance, especially considering how hard it has been for Kings to score goals lately. You can't have one of your goals wiped off the board on a controversial call. I thought it was 100% the wrong decision, in my opinion. He should have challenged it, and even if you lose it, I still think it was worth the challenge. So what was my big takeaway from this game? Well, have you ever heard that saying, the struggle is real? Well, the struggle is very real right now for the LA Kings. I didn't think they played that bad, but obviously the entire team is struggling with a crisis of confidence right now. Plus, it seems the Kings are getting absolutely no breaks. If you've watched this show for any length of time, you probably know I don't complain much about officiating. If there's a really bad call, I'll certainly point it out. But in general, I think the on-ice officials have a tough job, and generally speaking, I think they do a pretty good job. But Alex Ferrier having that second goal in 3 games disallowed. In Columbus, it was for an offsides, and it was the right call. But against the Panthers, that goalie interference call on Trevor Lewis, I thought it was absolutely the wrong call. And Florida's Evan Rodriguez puts his stick in between the legs of Trevor Lewis as he's going to the net. That put Lewis off balance, and that's caused him to go into the goaltender, Sergei Bobrovsky. Now, because Lewis went into the goalie based on what the Florida players' actions were, never mind the fact it probably should have been a penalty on Rodriguez, it should not have been goalie interference. It's no different than when a defensive player pushes an offensive player into his own goalie. It's the same thing. So that obviously was a terrible call that went against the Kings. And then when the Kings were going down 2 men, Quentin Byfield got tripped at center ice, and there was no call. And then just seconds after that, Warren Fogle takes the high sticking call. that puts the Kings down 2 men. And yes, the Fogle call was the correct call. However, if they called the trip on Byfield, which should have been called, then that call doesn't even happen because they blow the play dead because there's a penalty on the Florida Panthers. So, again, it's just nothing is going right for the Kings right now. So what are the options for the Kings? There are no options. You have to fight through it. Every team struggles. Every team goes through bad stretches, and the only thing you can do is fight your way through it. Again, if the Kings play good defense, they're giving themselves a chance to win. It was a 1-0 game going to the third period on the road against the defending Stanley Cup champs. You're in a position to win the game, but they didn't get a couple of breaks, and of course, they didn't capitalize on some opportunities. But I think it's just, again, we've harped on this before. When things are rough, you go back to basics, get pucks and bodies to the net, and if you happen to get a breakaway or an odd man rush, you have to capitalize on those opportunities when you're not scoring goals, when things are rough right now. So it's not going to get any easier for the Kings with these upcoming games against Tampa Bay and Carolina. And again, they just will have to fight through it. I will say one thing. When you looked at this game, like I said, I didn't think the Panthers were dominating, but one area they clearly were better than the Kings was attacking the net. The Panthers are always looking to take the puck to the net. And even if they didn't have a great scoring chance, they would throw it in front of the net. And that's a dangerous area. And you get a right bounce of a puck off the back end boards, a puck off a skate or a body, and it goes to you. Those can be key factors in key goals. And there was no question in my mind that in that respect, the Panthers did a much better job than the Kings. All right, up next, we're going to talk about some individual players in the loss of the Panthers, especially Drew Doughty. We'll do that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Super Bowl 59 is here. One game, two teams, endless possibilities, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action with live betting all game long. You can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you play and be involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, knowing you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl, that is icing on the cake. It is a Super Bowl rematch from a couple years ago. Kansas City Chiefs taking on the Philadelphia Eagles. Chiefs looking to three-peat. They are 1.5-point favorites in this one. Download the app. Head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you will score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. All right, let's get into some individual players for the Kings in that 3-0 loss to Florida. We always start with the goaltender, Darcy Kuemper. Allowed 2 goals on 38 shots, and I thought Kuemper was good enough for the Kings to win under normal circumstances. As for the 2 goals he allowed, the first one, Florida just had numbers in front of the net. Puck goes into a dangerous area. They make an extra pass, and it goes into the net. Kuemper did go down early, couldn't recover. Still, I thought, bad turnover and poor coverage by his defense. So wasn't a great goal on his part, but I thought he got let down by his defense in that one. Second goal, 2-man advantage. Puck goes wide of the net, off the boards, and right to a Panthers player who taps it in at the side of the net. Otherwise, I thought Kuemper, again, was good enough to win and didn't get the support. So Darcy Kuemper drops to 14, 5, and 6 on the season. The Kings did not lose this game because Darcy Kuemper wasn't good enough, in my opinion. All right, Drew Doughty. How did Drew look in his first game of the season? Well, I think it depends on how you look at it. If you were just breaking down the game he had and didn't take into account the circumstances, I would say he was okay. I didn't think it was anything special. He was a -2. But if you take into account that he hadn't played all season and he gets thrown into it, and he played 23 minutes and 51 seconds to lead all players in time on ice, that's pretty crazy. That's pretty remarkable. Now, again, had he played all year and you saw the game he had, you probably wouldn't think much of it. But for his first game in 4 months, right back at the NHL level, pretty good. He started with Jacob Moverar. Later, he was with Mikey Anderson. We saw Vladislav Gavrikov on the second pairing with Jordan Spence. Doughty kind of played with everybody at some point. After the game, I thought Drew Doughty had some very interesting comments. He called his first game back, quote, amazing. He said he hadn't been this nervous in a game since his first NHL game, which I thought was wild. Said he felt good, but maybe got a little tired in the third period. As for the question, did Drew Doughty's return provide a spark for the LA Kings? I would have to say no. Not saying the Kings weren't thrilled to have him back. Not saying that it wasn't great to have him on the bench. Drew has a love for hockey that is infectious, and I think that that's something very positive to have on your team. But did I feel like because Drew Doughty was back, the Kings did something extraordinary in this one? Did they have an extra energy that they hadn't had lately? No, I don't think so. They played well. Like I said, defensively, I thought they played well. They put himself in a position to win if they could score a goal. And they did score, of course, had one wiped away. But I really didn't feel like there was some sort of magical spark because Drew Doughty was back. We're glad to have him back for sure. But I didn't feel like there was some sort of spark because Drew played. Alex Ferrier, no goals in 11 games now. But, of course, he's had 2 goals wiped away. One unjustly, I thought. But I thought he played a really solid game, and he should have had something to show for it. I said this after the game that was the goal that was wiped away against Columbus, where he made a great diving play to put the puck in the net. Even though neither of those goals counted, I hope he still takes some confidence out of it and can get on track here soon and get some goals that actually do count in the stats. As far as some individual leaders for the Kings in the game against Florida, obviously no goals, so the Kings had no players with goals or assists or even a plus player. Drew Doughty was a -2, as I mentioned. Philip Deneau, Kevin Fiala, Warren Foegele, Adrian Kempe, Andrei Kopitar, Alex Ferrier, Trevor Moore, Alex Turcotte, and Vladislav Gavrikov were all a -1. Adrian Kempe and Quentin Byfield led the Kings with 4 shots on goal. Mikey Anderson led the Kings with blocked shots with 3. Philip Deneau had 4 hits to lead the team. Drew Doughty led the Kings in ice time with 23 minutes and 51 seconds. Philip Deneau was the Kings' best player in the faceoff circle, winning 12 faceoffs and losing only 5. So Jim Hiller decides to sit young defenseman Brant Clark. He recently demoted Clark from the second pairing to the third pairing and off the number 1 power play unit. And someone had to come out of the lineup to make room for Drew Doughty. And it was either going to be Jordan Spence or Brant Clark, and it turned out to be Clark. And personally, I don't have an issue with this. We saw earlier in the season that Jordan Spence was struggling, and he was a healthy scratch. He got demoted and ended up helping him bounce back, and he's been a much more consistent player ever since. So I can understand why Jim Hiller might think a similar move could benefit Brant Clark. Now, if you have the opinion that Clark is a more talented offensive player than Spence, and because of our lack of offense lately, Clark should be in over Spence, I think that's a reasonable argument to make. But I would also say that part of the reason why Spence was moved up to the second pairing and on the number 1 power play unit was because he is more direct with the puck on net, while Brant Clark is more of a playmaker. So when you're not scoring goals, you probably want that guy who's going to be more direct and getting the shot on net rather than a guy who's looking to make the fancy passes. So I know that there are some out there who look at this and they think that the Kings are, doing something to mess with the development of Brant Clark. But look, the bottom line is the Kings right now are looking to win first and develop second, at least at the NHL level. This isn't the San Jose Sharks who stink and are playing all their young players, giving them a ton of minutes, giving them, all the top positions because they're looking to develop these guys for the future. They don't really care about winning games right now. They want to get these guys experience and start the learning curve and develop them. Kings are looking to win games now. They are looking to be the best team they can be come playoff time. Their priority is not developing Brant Clark. Now, I think they feel good enough about Brant Clark that he can help them at the NHL level, and that's why he's in the NHL and not in the AHL. But I will say if they do make the decision to sit Brant Clark for any length of time, then they should send him down to the AHL because he's not going to help his development just in practice with the Kings. I think he would be better off going to the AHL, playing top minutes there, playing on their number 1 power play unit. if that's going to be the case. And you call up Sammy Holinius and give you an extra forward. Right now, the Kings have 3 players who are healthy scratches, and they're all defensemen. So I think Brant Clark will be fine. I think he'll be back in the lineup relatively soon. So we'll see. So I'm not hitting the panic button on Brant Clark or how the Kings are utilizing him after he gets to be a healthy scratch for 1 game. Now, there was a rumor floated out there before the Kings-Panthers game about Brant Clark being traded. We'll address that next here on Locked On LA Kings, your team every day. Hey, those of us that live in Southern California, so lucky. We live in a place where there's so many awesome live events to go to, sports, concerts, theater events, comedy shows. But no matter what you're into or where you live, you should do what I do for all your ticket needs, and that is use Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks. It makes getting tickets for live events even easier. It filters out the fluff and shows you only incredible deals on seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands of tickets. The all-in pricing feature shows you the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. And you'll get the lowest price guaranteed, or Gametime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off. Download Gametime today. What time is it? Gametime. All right, you may or may not know who Kevin Weeks is. He's a former NHL goalie. He now is in the media. He does work for the NHL Network, TSN, ESPN, ABC. And he fancies himself as a newsbreaker on social media sometimes. And he does break stories from time to time. So he saw that Brant Clark was a healthy scratch. And sometimes when you see a player who's good, who is a healthy scratch, sometimes that can be an indication that he could be traded because he's sitting because there's talks going on and the team doesn't want him to get hurt, and which would ruin a trade. So here was the post that Kevin Weeks had on X or Twitter. Quote, with the return of Drew Doughty to the LA lineup, defenseman Brant Clark, who leads the team in points by a defenseman, appears to be a healthy scratch tonight. Perhaps the Kings are setting up a move with his ice time diminishing, end quote. So I get how it works in the media. Guys do stuff to get attention, to get likes, to get retweets, reposts, get clicks, all that kind of stuff. And maybe that's what Kevin Weeks is doing. At last check, that post had over 1,000 likes, over 500 reposts, and almost 300 comments. And obviously, it's not impossible for Brant Clark to be traded. He's not untouchable, but I would be very, very surprised that if the Kings were looking to trade him. I think this was simply a fact that Drew Doughty was coming back in the lineup and somebody had to sit. Obviously, if it was Jordan Spence, he's not putting out that tweet or that post because most people don't know who Jordan Spence is, and he's not leading the team in points. And I get the argument that he's making, but as I mentioned earlier, Jordan Spence right now is actually playing better hockey of late than Brant Clark from a production standpoint. Last 5 games, Jordan Spence has 4 points. Last 11 games, Brant Clark has 3 points. So I don't see anything bigger than what it was for face value. Like I said, I just think that the Kings needed to sit a defenseman, and they felt like, Jim Hiller felt like in the moment that Jordan Spence was the better option right now than Brant Clark. Again, I don't think it's an indictment of Clark. I don't think it's any kind of a bigger statement. I just think they had to sit somebody, and that's who they decided to sit. So is it possible the Kings could trade Brant Clark? Sure, it's possible. I mean, if there's a deal out there for the Kings to make themselves significantly better and the price to pay is Brant Clark, then I think they would consider it depending on who the other player was. But again, I really don't think Brant Clark is being shopped. I don't think they're considering moving him. I think there are 2 young players who the Kings feel are building blocks for their future. One of them is Quentin Byfield, and the other one is Brant Clark. All right, the Kings are back in action on Thursday, right back up on the horse. They're in Tampa St. Pete to take on the Lightning. Tampa Bay, a pretty desperate team right now. They are holding the final wildcard spot in the East. They're coming off a surprising 4-1 home loss to the lowly Chicago Blackhawks. And the Lightning have lost 4 of 5. That said, they still have some really talented players. Braden Point has 28 goals. That's fifth in the NHL. Nikita Kucherov has 74 points. That's third best in the NHL. Their goalie, a future Hall of Famer and Cup winner, Andrei Vasilevsky, missed the team's last game due to illness. His status against the Kings is unknown. Mentioned it earlier, but the Kings will go with David Riddick in net. Big Save Dave has lost his last two starts, and his numbers on the road this season are just 3 and 8. So another big challenge for the LA Kings coming up on Thursday. Faceoff is set for 4 p.m. LA time. You can see the game locally on the FanDuel Sports Network, nationally on ESPN Plus, and you can hear it on the 710 ESPN app. For you everydayers, those of you that listen and watch Locked On LA Kings every day, obviously coming on Thursday, we'll do the show shortly after the conclusion of the Kings Lightning, break it all down, and tell you what happened in the Kings' latest game. If you want to stay interactive with the show on social media, X, Twitter, Instagram, we're at Locked On LA Kings. If you want to send an email for the fan feedback show every Friday or for anything else, the email address is lockedoneddie@gmail.com, EDDIE. All right, that'll do it for this show. Thank you, as always, for listening and watching this episode of Locked On LA Kings, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk to you after the game on Thursday. And as always, go Kings, go.